Undercurrents at school. Seattle's late summer sun filtered softly through the curtains as Hana Lee rushed around her family's modest home, gathering documents for her college orientation. The house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, buzzed with the usual chaos of a Monday morning. The scent of coffee brewing, the thud of footsteps upstairs, and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. For Hana, this August marked a turning point. Her first semester at the University of Washington was just days away, and excitement mingled with nervous anticipation. Her family had always been tight-knit. Mr. Lee, a second-generation Korean American, worked long shifts as a pharmacist, while Mrs. Lee managed a local bakery, rising before dawn each day. Despite their busy lives, family dinners remained sacred. It was around the dinner table that Hana's younger sister, Emily, usually sparkled. Known for her quick laugh and gentle humor, Emily was just entering sophomore year at Roosevelt High. And Hana had always seen her as sensitive, yet resilient, a little shy, maybe, but with a creative streak that showed itself in sketches strewn about her bedroom. But lately, Hana had noticed a change. Emily lingered in her room with the door closed, inventing excuses to skip family board game nights. She flinched when the house phone rang and seemed distracted when spoken to, her once vivid presence shrinking to a quiet shadow. Hana chalked it up to the usual struggles of adolescence: new friends, academic stress, teenage moods. Yet certain details gnawed at her. Emily's textbooks with corners nervously chewed, cryptic texts flashing on her phone, late-night trips to the bathroom with muffled, sinking cries. The first day of school arrived with Seattle's trademark drizzle. Hana, determined to make her last week at home meaningful, offered Emily a ride. As they approached Roosevelt High, a sprawling brick building bustling with students in new sneakers and backpacks, Emily shrank lower in her seat, fiddling with her sleeves. Hana brushed it off as nerves, but the school's welcoming banners and laboring buses did little to ease the tightness in Emily's expression. At school, Emily navigated the noisy hallways with practiced caution. Her former friends, once the source of shared sleepovers and secrets, barely glanced her way. Instead, there was a chill, a pointed silence in homeroom, averted eyes at lunchtime. Unbeknownst to Hana, whispers had already begun, rumors winding their way through group chats, subtle sneers hidden in group projects, a cruel meme about Emily circulating on someone's Instagram story. Emily moved like a ghost, ducking into the art wing between classes, clutching her sketchbook like armor. That afternoon, Hana waited in the parking lot after school, watching through the rain-speckled windshield as Emily approached with slumped shoulders and hurried steps, gaze glued to her sneakers. Hana tried to coax Emily into conversation on the way home, but her sister only managed a wan smile before retreating upstairs, backpack still strapped to her shoulders. At dinner that night, Emily stayed unusually quiet, pushing her food around her plate. Conversation at the table drifted from Mrs. Lee's new cupcake recipes to Hana's stories about freshman orientation. Hana watched Emily, waiting for her to chime in with a joke or a question, but it never came. When Mrs. Lee gently asked how school went, Emily simply murmured, "It was okay," then excused herself, leaving her untouched food behind. Alone in her room, Hana felt a nagging sense of unease. She replayed the day's moments, Emily fading into the background, the tension in her voice. Something in her gut told her this was about more than just high school nerves. Hana's protective instincts stirred. But with college looming and family responsibilities splitting her attention, she pushed the worry aside, promising herself to keep an eye on Emily, just in case. As the lights in the Lee household dimmed that night, a storm was already brewing beneath the surface, a silent current threatening to pull Emily under. And, for the first time, Hana found herself truly afraid for her little sister, unaware of just how dark and dangerous the undercurrents at school had become. Silent wounds. Emily had always preferred the subtle comforts of routine, catching the city bus with the same handful of neighbors, doodling in the margins of her notebooks during first period, sharing inside jokes with her small group of friends. But as the fall term wore on, those comforts began to dissolve. Days when Emily once felt safe now seemed like trials to be endured. Each morning, she lingered in her room, waiting until the last possible minute before leaving for school. She double-checked her appearance, making sure her clothes matched the neutral tones favored by her classmates, tying her hair in the style she once saw as safe. She scrolled anxiously through her phone, feeling her pulse quicken at the flurry of notifications and the sting of being left out of group chats where she once belonged. Roosevelt High, with its sun-faded banners and humming fluorescent lights, had transformed into something hostile. Emily felt eyes on her as she moved through the halls. She avoided the main entrance, slipping in a side door and hoping to go unnoticed. In class, the seat next to her remained conspicuously empty. Her whispered hi to old friends, often going unanswered or met with an awkward shuffle. Rumors seemed to float just beyond her earshot, always returning to her with a harsher edge. The bullying took many forms, some sharp as broken glass, others piercing in their subtlety. A cruel note left in her locker with pink bubble letters. Nobody likes you anymore. Glances down the hallway, accompanied by stifled laughter. In the girls' bathroom, a pair of classmates glanced up from their phones, smirked, and abruptly stopped, talking when she entered. But the worst wounds were digital. Late at night, after locking her bedroom door, Emily scrolled through Instagram and saw memes and inside jokes morphing into barbed attacks. Her face pasted onto cartoons, her name paired with rumors, too ugly to repeat. A group chat she'd once been part of now excluded her, and she could only watch, quietly blocked from speaking, as her former friends discussed her as if she weren't there at all. At home, Emily tried to hold herself together. She became a master of camouflage, forcing small smiles when her parents asked about her day, deflecting with polite answers. She claimed headaches or exhaustion to avoid family dinners, retreating instead into the solitude of her room, where she could finally cry in silence. Sometimes Hana would knock, her voice gentle through the door, but Emily would pretend to be asleep or absorbed in homework. The words, "I'm fine," poised on her tongue. In quieter moments, Emily found herself questioning everything. What had she done wrong? Was it something she'd said or not said? She picked apart old conversations in her head, rereading messages for a clue she had missed. The sense of isolation settled deep in her bones, an invisible ache that grew heavier each day. The teachers at Roosevelt, already overwhelmed by crowded classrooms and mounting paperwork, hardly noticed. A few muttered reminders about being kind, but real intervention never came. When Emily's grades began to slip, she received cursory emails. "If you need help, let us know." But nobody asked why she had stopped raising her hand or why her homework was missing. At home, even her parents struggled to reach her. Mr. Lee tried with gentle jokes, Mrs. Lee with after-school pastries and careful observations. But Emily retreated further, convinced no one could understand. When her mother asked if something was wrong, Emily shook her head, eyes locked on the kitchen table, afraid that speaking out would make things worse. Sleep became elusive. Emily often lay awake, nervously glancing at her
We
phone,
need to have a little chat
wondering
about
what
you found
messages
here.
might await her in the morning. Her
Don't worry, just
sketchbook,
tell me the truth.
once her sanctuary, now sat
This
untouched
photo was
on her
taken the night
desk,
she disappeared.
a silent witness to the swirl of
That's your car
fears
in the
and
background, isn't
self-doubt.
it?
One rainy evening, as thunder rolled over Seattle, Emily stood at her bedroom window, shoulders trembling. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly seen. Shame and heartbreak pressed in from every direction, and still, she said nothing. The wound she carried remained invisible, etched deep beneath the surface, unshared and unspoken. And yet, outside her room, Hana watched with growing unease, sensing the storm gathering inside her little sister, a storm no one else could seem to see. Harsh truths. The rain pelted Seattle in relentless sheets one Tuesday, drumming against classroom windows and pooling beneath students' sneakers. For Emily, the weather felt strangely fitting, a backdrop for the growing storm in her own life. She moved through the day in a haze, barely registering the blur of lectures, the shuffle of bodies in bustling halls, or the occasional whispered taunt that floated just out of earshot. That afternoon, disaster struck. It began innocuously enough. In gym class, Emily's teacher stepped out to deal with a phone call, leaving the students unsupervised. Sensing opportunity, a group of girls, once Emily's friends, huddled together and snickered, the tension in the air suddenly razor sharp. The insults started softly, a trickle of jeering comments about Emily's clothes and hair, but soon turned crueler. Taunts about her family, her supposed oddness, the things she had once confided to people she thought she could trust. When she tried to walk away, someone blocked her path. Another girl snapped a video on her phone, panning across Emily's face as tears stung her eyes, then zooming in as a carton of chocolate milk was upended over her head. The laughter was loud and merciless. Emily's humiliation was complete, indelible, immortalized on a device for the world to see. She barely remembered running from the gym, soaking wet, her hands shaking as she hid in a deserted stall in the girls' bathroom. Within an hour, the video was online, first in a private Snapchat group, then on Instagram stories. The comments multiplied in real time. LOL, she deserved it. What a freak. Even people Emily barely knew watched, shared, and snickered. Emily's phone buzzed and flashed ceaselessly in her backpack. Each notification a fresh blow. By the time she caught her breath, the damage had already spread. Hana learned of it almost by accident, catching a snippet of conversation between two younger cousins at the bakery that evening. Her heart hammered as she searched for the video, stomach dropping as she watched the short, grainy footage of her sister's public humiliation. She barely held back tears of fury and helplessness. Back at home, Emily locked herself in her room and would not answer anyone. Not Hana, not her parents. She lay curled on her bed, phone discarded and face pressed into her pillow, wanting only to disappear. She dreaded the next day, terrified of seeing her classmates' stares. Or worse, their averted eyes and stifled giggles. Even at dinner, she was silent. When Mrs. Lee pressed her with gentle concern, Emily simply muttered she wasn't hungry and retreated without eating. Hana's concern turned into anger. She had hoped things were just a rough patch, that with time, Emily would recover. But now, the reality was unavoidable and brutal. Her little sister was the target of relentless public bullying, and no one at school had done anything to stop it. Scanning the school's code of conduct on her laptop, Hana noticed a sharp, bitter irony in the cheery promises of a safe environment, and the hotline number that, Emily confessed later, that night felt useless to her. That evening, Hana sat outside Emily's door, her back pressed to the wood as she tried again to reach her sister. "Em," she said softly, "I saw the video. Please, I want to help." Silence stretched between them. Inside, Emily sobbed quietly, too ashamed, too tired to reply. But Hana made a silent vow as she sat in the hallway, fists clenched in determination. She would not stand by any longer. No more silence, no more ignorance. She would do whatever it took to protect her sister, and to make sure that those responsible faced the consequences of their cruelty. Far from fading, the storm was just beginning. In the cold, gray night, surrounded by the quiet hum of appliances and the distant sounds of traffic, Hana's resolve solidified into something sharp and unyielding. She would fight for Emily, even if it meant taking on a world far larger and more vicious than she'd ever imagined. Secret investigation. Hana had never thought of herself as a detective, but as she sat at her desk late into the night, surrounded by hastily scribbled notes in the muted glow of her laptop screen, she realized she had little choice. The school's indifference had left her family stranded, and Emily had withdrawn into a silence Hana could hardly reach. There was no one else to turn to, and nowhere else to go, except forward. Her first step was information. If she wanted anyone to take this seriously, she needed hard proof, not just stories or emotional pleas. Hana began by researching the digital trail. She knew the video of Emily's humiliation had circulated widely, but most traces seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. Private stories and invite-only chat groups made it nearly impossible to access. And the few classmates she reached out to via text were evasive or outright hostile. Undeterred, Hana created a list. She wrote down every name she recognized from the gym that day, cross-referencing yearbooks and tagging photos she found on social media. It was laborious, her eyes bleary by midnight, but every name and every post might be a potential source of evidence. In secret, she opened a new anonymous Instagram account, following every possible lead in the Roosevelt High network. Days blurred with restless effort. Hana set up discreet alerts for videos containing certain keywords or Emily's name. She learned how to use apps that could capture disappearing messages and screen record before stories vanished into the ether. Several classmates posted taunting inside jokes or ambiguous memes, just cryptic enough to avoid scrutiny by adults. Hana documented everything, screenshot by screenshot, building a digital folder where the truth began to take shape, even if it was ugly. But technology could only reveal so much. Determined to understand all sides, Hana turned her focus to the physical world. She started going for morning walks around the perimeter of Roosevelt High, keeping a subtle distance. She noticed clusters of students, mostly the same faces she'd cataloged in her files, huddled near the side gates, laughing loudly, their glances shifting when she passed. One morning, she overheard a snippet of conversation. Two girls arguing about whose turn it was to post next. And the way their voices dropped when she caught their eye set her nerves on edge. Hana fought the urge to confront them immediately. If she were careless, they'd just shut up or warn the others, and she'd lose her only shot at facts. Instead, she doubled back to Emily, careful not to overwhelm her. Their interactions were delicate. Too many questions made Emily clam up. But if Hana pretended nothing was wrong, Emily's sadness only deepened. She shifted her strategy, offering comfort first, sitting quietly with her sister, before gently encouraging her to talk. In the warmth of their shared silence, Hana tried, if someone you knew was hurting, wouldn't you want them to have someone on their side?" Sometimes, Emily just nodded. But on good days, she'd whisper a name or let slip a crumb of information. and Hana stored it away with careful gratitude. As the days passed, Hana realized the bullying was more systematic than she'd guessed. It wasn't only cyberbullying or mean-spirited videos. There were coordinated moves to shun, exclude, and humiliate Emily in subtle ways. An accidental spilled drink at lunch, a rumor started in group projects, sly notes dropped into her locker. Victims like Emily weren't just public targets. They were isolated, left defenseless by a network of silent accomplices. Any break in the wall of silence seemed impossible. Still, opportunity sometimes surfaced in unexpected places. One afternoon, at the corner cafe where Mrs. Lee often stopped to buy pastries for the family, Hana overheard two students complaining about how Alexa kept pushing it too far this time. Recognizing the names from her list, Hana decided to take a calculated risk. She approached one of the girls, a sophomore named Ruby, while she was waiting for her latte. At first, Ruby was defensive, arms folded and gaze averted. But Hana, channeling all the patience she'd learned from her mother, simply asked, "Has anyone ever stood up for you when it mattered?" There was a tremor of guilt across Ruby's face. Over the next days, with gentle messages and sincere attention, Hana managed to earn her confidence. Ruby wouldn't say much, but she confirmed, "Alexa started it. The others just played along. No one wanted to be the next target." Hana jotted every confession into her notebook. Still, the heart of it eluded her. The original motives, the instigators, the faculty's blind eye. When Hana tried to meet with school counselors, she was met with polite sympathy and deflecting reassurances. "We take bullying very seriously," the counselor intoned, offering brochures and hotline numbers. But when Hana pressed for specifics, security footage from the gym, phone policy enforcement, she received only bureaucratic shrugs, privacy issues, hands tied. It was becoming painfully clear that the system was designed to protect itself, not its students. True to her nature, Hana refused to quit. She tracked down the school's code of conduct and compared it word for word against local and state anti-bullying statutes. She started documenting not just incidents, but the administration's deliberate inaction, the tone of emails, the minutes from parent-teacher meetings, the hollow platitudes handed out in assemblies about respect and community. For every empty promise, Hana kept the receipts.
Almost done.
Not all of
Hurry.
Hana's mornings went smoothly. She had to balance her own life, university orientation, helping at the bakery, supporting her parents, who had begun to whisper at night about moving schools for Emily.
Get it gone now.
Her grades slipped as she spent evenings cross-referencing digital evidence with frail testimonies. At moments, fatigue overwhelmed her. The guilt of not protecting Emily from the start, and the frustration of fighting an invisible enemy, sometimes left Hana crumpled over her phone, blinking away angry tears. Yet, each small breakthrough nudged her forward. The more she pieced things together, the less this seemed like a routine squabble, and the more it resembled a coordinated campaign, an echo of the toxic cultures she'd only read about in news headlines or seen in cautionary after-school specials. But this was no scripted drama. This was her family, her little sister, her responsibility. Gradually, others began to notice Hana's determination. A shy message from a freshman appeared in her anonymous account. "I saw what happened in the hall last week. I'm sorry. If you need someone to talk to." Another classmate, emboldened by Hana's gentle persistence, admitted that teachers avoided difficult confrontations, afraid of provoking angry parents or losing state funding. Each whisper, each confession, became another thread in the growing web of truth Hana was doggedly assembling. By the end of the month, Hana's folder bristled with evidence. time-stamped screenshots, anonymized chat transcripts, secondhand testimonies, school policies, and her own methodical observations. She developed a timeline highlighting every major incident, every administrative evasion, every false promise by staff and district officials. The next step, she realized, was to turn all this knowledge into power. As Emily continued to struggle under the weight of humiliation and isolation, Hana's secret investigation was nearly complete. Now, she would have to decide how to wield what she had uncovered, not just to protect her sister, but to ensure that every voice silenced at Roosevelt High would be heard. And as fall's first chill crept through the city, Hana knew her family stood at the edge of a battle. The quiet, invisible war was over. The fight for justice and for Emily's healing was about to begin. The system of cover-ups. Hana looked at the folder on her desk, thick with printed out screenshots, scribbled statements, and a chronological timeline of every humiliation her sister had endured. She had pieced together the story from digital fragments and reluctant whispers, but confronting a system that seemed engineered to protect itself would take more than evidence alone. The tipping point came late one Sunday evening. Hana sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open to the school's official website, reading and rereading Roosevelt High's Code of Conduct. The page was thick with promises: zero tolerance for bullying, commitment to diversity, a pledge to listen to every voice. Hana knew the pretty language belied a hollow reality. Nearby, her mother quietly prepared tea, watching her older daughter with a worried gaze. "Mom," Hana finally said, "I don't think Emily's safe at that school. How many more times can we tell her to stay strong when nobody's willing to protect her?" Mrs. Lee, weary but strong, placed her hand over Hana's. "Let's go to the school together," she said quietly. "They can't ignore us if we speak as a family." The following morning, the Lees stepped into Roosevelt High's administrative office. The walls were lined with photos of happy students and plaques boasting awards for school climate. After a few uncomfortable minutes, Principal Thompson appeared, her smile polite but mechanical, a practiced look of sympathy that suggested she had done this before. "I've heard some concerns about bullying involving your daughter," she said, folding her hands on her desk. "And first, let me say that we are deeply committed to creating a safe environment for all our students." Hana exchanged a glance with her mother. She produced the folder and handed it across the desk. Principal Thompson leafed through the documents with the faintest flicker of surprise. Evidence was not something she could wave away entirely. "The school district encourages students to come forward," the principal said, avoiding specifics. "And we do have protocols for these situations. Of course, sometimes stories get misunderstood, especially at this age. Teenagers can be dramatic." Hana felt anger rise in her throat. "My sister didn't get dramatic.
The pattern.
She got cyberbullied,
It's right here.
humiliated, and assaulted, while other students watched and filmed her. We brought you screen recordings, witness accounts, actual proof. Are you telling us this is still just a misunderstanding?" The principal shook her head carefully, never raising her voice. "I'm not dismissing your concerns, but there are procedures we have to follow. These incidents are often complicated. Our hands are tied by privacy laws, and we need to respect the rights of all students, not just your daughters. We'll investigate, but I can't discuss details or take disciplinary action based solely on student testimony. We also encourage students to use our anonymous reporting hotline." Mrs. Lee interrupted, voice trembling. "She did. No one called her back." The principal's expression hardened just slightly. "Let's try to keep emotions out of this. We can't be everywhere at once. The teachers have already received anti-bullying training this
I know where I
semester.
am.
We
I
can
don't have
monitor
much time.
online
The
spaces
drive is under the
only
mattress.
so much.
Please hurry.
The meeting ended with Principal Thompson promising to look into it further. But Hana sensed a wall going up, not of understanding, but of legalese and excuses. As she and her mother walked back to the parking lot, Mrs. Lee's hand found hers. She wants this problem to disappear. Her mother whispered, not to solve it. Over the next week, Hana watched the farce unfold. Emily was called into a counselor's office and asked vague, loaded questions. Are you sure you haven't misinterpreted anything? Do you think you did anything that might have upset the other students? Emily, already fragile, felt implicated rather than believed. The message was clear. Speaking up only made things more complicated. Meanwhile, the students responsible for the worst of the attacks, students like Alexa, the ringleader, and her close friends, carried on as if nothing had happened. Days after the meeting, Hana noticed Alexa posting group photos after school activities, tagged at events that celebrated inclusion and friendship. The hypocrisy stung. When Hana tried to approach one of Alexa's teachers, she was told, "It's not our place to get involved in student drama unless something threatens physical safety. If Emily wants to talk, she knows where my office is." The more Hana learned, the more she realized how deep the rot went. Any attempt to push the investigation was met not with curiosity, but with defensiveness and bureaucratic double-talk. Complaints disappeared into confidential records. Emails to administrators got copied to legal counsel. Even the Parent-Teacher Association meetings, filled with polished speeches and Sunday socials, seemed designed to keep real conflict out of sight. Hana reached out to other parents through discreet texts and private Facebook groups. A few responded hesitantly, with experiences that mirrored Emily's. Children bullied and isolated, complaints brushed aside. The school's reputation always the top concern. They want good numbers for the district, one parent confided. Bad publicity means less funding, fewer honors, lower property values. It's easier to look the other way. Mr. Lee, growing increasingly frustrated, pressed for a formal investigation at the next school board meeting. "My daughter tried to do everything right. She reported, she documented, she trusted you would help. What do you have to say to families who trust you with their children's safety?" The reply was a masterclass. In evasion, we cannot comment on individual cases, but the district is committed to maintaining a safe and respectful learning environment. We encourage families to reach out to our trained professionals if there are ongoing concerns. Back home, the Lees were caught between rage and despair. Emily, exhausted by repeated interviews and accusations of exaggeration, retreated even further. She spoke little, her confidence eroded by the sense that speaking out only made her more vulnerable. Hana, meanwhile, spent evening after evening poring over messages from other families, gathering a broader pattern of neglect. Late at night, Hana confided in her parents. "If the people in charge won't take responsibility, we have to show them what responsibility looks like. This isn't about saving face for the school. It's about preventing the next Emily." Even the community around Roosevelt seemed divided. Some parents, fearful of drawing the principal's ire, urged the Lees to drop the matter quietly. A few others, their courage buoyed by Hana's tenacity, offered solidarity. "If you do something, we'll back you," one father told Hana in a hushed voice after church. "It's gone on too long." Through it all, the school's PR machinery doubled down. Newsletters celebrated Mental Health Awareness Month and paraded pictures of smiling students at pep rallies. But the reality, Hana knew, was far darker. And as fresh rumors began to swirl, some painting the Lees as troublemakers, others questioning Emily's honesty, the family faced new social isolation from a community unwilling to take sides. Hana's resolve only grew sharper. Bureaucracy could delay, gaslight, and silence, but it could not erase the truth she'd gathered, or the network of frustrated parents and scared students she was slowly assembling. The school's apparent cover-up became a rallying point. If they want to hide it, Hana wrote in a private message to her allies, "We'll make sure the truth is too big to ignore." The battle lines had been drawn. One side hid behind policies, PR, and plausible deniability. On the other stood a family, wounded but not defeated, and a young woman who was learning, one sleepless night at a time, that sometimes justice had to be dragged into the light. The Justice Campaign. Hana stared at her notes, the folder now overflowing with hard-won evidence. The school's veneer of concern had proven as thin as rice paper. Her family kept circling the same tight question late at night. What now? She knew they couldn't count on the school. Most parents were too fearful to speak up, and even Emily seemed suspended in her trauma. The question haunted Hana through campus orientations, bakery shifts, and lonely rides on the city bus. But by the next full moon, the sense of helplessness had twisted inside her into resolve. It was time to stop following the system's rules written to keep everything silent and safe for those in power. Her first step was creating an anonymous social media account. She and Emily were both too exposed to post openly, but anonymity offered a shield. Hana set up a private Instagram page, Roosevelt Truths, using VPNs and borrowed phone numbers. The bio read, "No more secrets, no more victims. It's time the truth came out." She uploaded a collage, redacted screenshots of bullying messages, blurred stills of the gym incident, quotes from other silenced voices. She made it clear this was not just Emily's story. It was the story of every kid erased by cruelty, every complaint buried under bureaucracy. Then, Hana reached out. She direct messaged students and parents she'd quietly connected with in previous weeks. In careful, compassionate notes, she encouraged them to share their own stories, anonymously if they chose.
Is he serious?
You are not alone. You don't have to keep quiet anymore. The effect was slow at first. A handful of followers, then a comment. "I saw this happen to my sister."
Police!
Another
Can't
message.
get away!
"They never did anything after my son was bullied, either." Each night, Hana sorted through the responses, confirming details, sifting the legitimate from the exaggerated. She double-checked every post, resistant to anything fake or overly dramatized. If Roosevelt High's administration wanted to cry witch hunt, she would make sure her campaign could hold up to scrutiny. Within a week, the account was buzzing. Students started sending private video clips from years past, phone footage of cafeteria outbursts, screen reports of group chats, memes that never should have been shared. A mother sent Hana a photo of her own child's bruised arm. Another recounted phone calls to the district that had gone unanswered. They didn't share names, but for the first time, victims and witnesses started seeing their experiences reflected in the public forum, not erased or gaslit behind closed doors. Hana's posts struck a balance. She was angry, but careful, exposing, but not vindictive. Every story shared was vetted. Every piece of evidence was double-checked. She found herself rising past her own exhaustion, driven by a kind of purpose she had never known before. The wave began to crest when a local community activist, a recent graduate of Roosevelt High, shared one of Hana's posts to her own large Twitter following, adding, "This has gone on for years. It's time for change." The activist's account had thousands of followers, many of whom had their own stories. Overnight, the Roosevelt truths hashtag trended across Seattle social media. Suddenly, Hana's private storm was public. Local journalists started to notice. One morning, a reporter from the Seattle Times reached out to the anonymous account, asking for an interview. Hana hesitated. Exposure was risky. If her identity leaked, the blowback on her family, and especially on Emily, could be harsh. But after consulting her parents and, most importantly, Emily, she agreed to talk. Still anonymously, she prepared documents, pieced together timelines, and connected the reporter directly with other families willing to share their stories. Public pressure mounted quickly. More parents recognized that their own complaints had been quietly shuffled into the school's confidential files. Some worried that they would face backlash. Others admitted in messages to Hana that they'd long tried to keep things quiet for the sake of their kids' college prospects or for community peace. But as the anonymous stories multiplied, as screenshots and video clips circulated, it became clear this was more than isolated drama. There was a systemic crisis. The school responded first with a canned PR email. Roosevelt High does not tolerate bullying or harassment of any kind. Any such allegations will be investigated thoroughly. Out of respect for privacy and legal guidelines, we cannot comment on individual cases. But the message only fueled the anger. Students and parents, once so passive, began demanding accountability at school events, on community forums, and in church basements. With the momentum building, Hana coordinated with other parents and students to petition the district for an independent investigation. She drafted a letter, clear and concise, but forceful. We, the undersigned, demand that an impartial third-party review allegations of systemic bullying and administrative neglect at Roosevelt High School. We request transparency, proper protection for witnesses, and publication of the investigation's findings. Dozens signed, then hundreds as word spread. In response, the school quietly called certain parents, urging calm. Rumors swirled that the administration was trying to uncover who was behind the Roosevelt Truths account. Some parents, afraid for job prospects or for their children, backed away. Others doubled down in their support for Hana's mission. For Emily, the exposure was terrifying at first. She dreaded returning to school each day, wondering if whispers and stares would multiply tenfold. But as a few classmates quietly thanked her, as an art teacher told her, "You're braver than most adults I know," Emily found herself standing a little straighter. The wounds hadn't healed, but they were no longer festering in the dark. Meanwhile, the Lee family's bonds grew deeper. Hana and Emily spent more late nights together, sometimes planning, sometimes simply watching old movies to distract themselves. Their parents worried, but saw their daughter's courage as a light in the storm. The community itself became a battleground. Long, sleepy PTA meetings swelled with parents, some angrily defending the school's reputation, others pushing for change. Board members who'd once recited platitudes were now fielding tough questions on live-streamed
Look, I just
forums.
need to know where you were.
Students
I already
began
told you,
distributing
Anna.
flyers calling
I
for
have a meeting.
safety and
I
real
really don't have time for
accountability.
this.
Some inspired by the flood of testimony now public. As fall deepened and rain pattered every window, the sense of
I know it
possibility
sounds strange,
swelled
but
just
I
as
really
strongly
didn't see him
as the
until it was too
backlash.
late.
A group of seniors organized a school
froze.
walkout, demanding transparency and the removal of staff who ignored reports of abuse. Teachers found themselves in tense staff meetings, arguing over whether it's really our problem or just a social media fad. Some staff quietly encouraged Hana's campaign. Others moved to protect themselves and their jobs. Hana knew the hardest part had only begun. Justice for Emily and others meant not only stopping the bullies, but also holding adults and institutions accountable. It meant risking backlash, rumors, and discipline. Still, as she looked around, at her parents, at her little sister, at the anonymous network of brave voices now swelling, Hana knew she could carry this fight as long as it took. As the first local news stories aired and the school district teetered at the edge of public scandal, Hana felt a new certainty. This wasn't just about her sister anymore. It was about every student who had ever been forced into silence. It was about showing the system what real justice looked like and proving that change could no longer be ignored. The storm of public opinion and confrontation, the campaign for justice at Roosevelt High, once a whispered resistance, now roared through hallways and city streets. Social media feeds exploded with stories and hashtags. Local news clips played on kitchen TVs across Seattle, and parents' chat groups buzzed with a nervous energy. Hana had lit a fire that would not easily be smothered. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the risks. The very anonymity that had protected Hana and Emily began to fray. Rumors spread swiftly. School administrators initiated an internal hunt for the owner of the Roosevelt Truths account, interviewing students, pressuring staff, and monitoring IP addresses on the school's network. The group of girls involved in bullying, especially Alexa and her closest friends, became more aggressive and desperate, convinced that Emily was behind the campaign and determined to uncover the truth. One morning, Emily found a note stuffed into her locker, written in jagged marker. "Snitches get stitches. Hope you're happy." Another time, someone deliberately shoulder-checked her in the hallway, whispering, "Watch your back." Hana herself started receiving anonymous, threatening DMs. "You better stop before you ruin more lives," one read. "We know what you're doing, and it won't end well." Occasionally, strangers crossed the street to avoid the Lees, or muttered under their breaths about that troublemaking family. The pressure of possible exposure was suffocating. Inside the Lee household, the weight of this new phase bore down on everyone. Mr. Lee began double-locking the doors at night and volunteering to pick Emily up after school. Mrs. Lee, usually so outgoing at her bakery, became distracted and anxious, sometimes forgetting orders or burning countless trays of pastries. Family dinners, once lively with laughter and teasing, grew quiet. Fear crept in like a cold wind under the door. Emily, for her part, felt her anxiety tighten every muscle and rob her of sleep. On the few mornings when she managed to choke down breakfast, the food tasted like cardboard. Public support online often felt distant compared to the stares and whispers in the hallways. Some students were supportive or offered silent nods of encouragement, but others, eager to stay out of the fray, avoided both sisters entirely. Teachers seemed divided, some more attentive and caring, others warning that bringing outside drama into school would not be tolerated. Hana tried to insulate her sister from the storm as best she could, but she knew the waves were hitting them all. Unable to focus on university orientation or her part-time job, Hana spent most evenings strategizing with trusted allies. Ruby, who had started quietly corroborating the truth to others, a few sympathetic parents, even one teacher who leaked internal memos showing the administration's attempt to control the messaging. More than once, online trolls and apologists for the bullies infiltrated the campaign's social media, leaving hateful and dismissive comments.
Thank you for meeting me.
Hana and her small team spent hours moderating, blocking, and documenting. Still, beyond the hate and threats, support continued to grow. Local advocacy groups for youth mental health, and anti-bullying initiatives reached out. One organization offered a free legal consultation, explaining the rights of students and families under Washington state law. A city council member referenced the Roosevelt scandal as evidence that our city's promise of safe schools is too often just words. For every attempt by the administration to regain control, a new wave of witnesses, advocates, and even alumni stepped forward to offer help. But the school, increasingly threatened, countered fiercely. Principal Thompson called an emergency assembly, addressing what she described as unsubstantiated claims of institutional failure and groupthink. She insisted, voice carefully modulated for the TV cameras, that Roosevelt High was a place of compassion and resilience, and warned that any student caught spreading falsehoods or engaging in digital harassment would face serious discipline. The next day, students found posters stapled to bulletin boards and emailed to parents. The posters extolled Roosevelt's history of excellence, highlighting diversity statistics in mental health resource links, but making no mention of accountability, restorative justice, or policy change. Some parents were swayed by the slick PR campaign, but others saw through it. You notice how they never actually say what they're doing to help victims? One mother whispered to Hana after church. As media scrutiny intensified, the school's legal team sent out a sternly worded letter to Hana's family. The letter cited ongoing investigations and cautioned against making potentially libelous or inflammatory public statements. Although the letter never directly accused Hana or Emily, it sent chills down their spines. Mr. Lee brought it to the attention of their new legal contact, who assured them it was a scare tactic. Standard playbook for institutions under fire, the lawyer said, with a grim smile. Matters escalated further when a reporter from a national news outlet arrived in Seattle to cover the story in person. One rainy afternoon, the Lee family agreed to meet the journalist in a quiet downtown coffee shop. The interview was long and emotional, with Hana and Emily's experience now the centerpiece of a larger investigation into bullying and administrative cover-ups across the region. The journalist promised to keep Emily's identity confidential, but everyone knew there were no true guarantees. Inside the school, conflict reached a fever pitch. A group of teachers demanded an open staff meeting with Principal Thompson, some privately expressing outrage over the silencing of students and reluctance to discipline bullies. Meanwhile, students organized a walkout for the following week, distributing flyers and posting TikToks, sharing their reasons. We're tired of being told our pain isn't real. Even the local PTA splintered, with some parents supporting the school outright and others forming a new coalition. Parents for Safe Schools, led in part by Mrs. Lee. Not all the battles were public. In the hallways, Hana caught classmates taking photos of Emily or whispering behind their hands. In the teacher's lounge, some staff debated quitting or contacting the district anonymously. In private Facebook groups, alumni began sharing stories from years past, revealing that this culture of silence and shame had haunted Roosevelt for a generation or more. The community's reactions ran the gamut. Some neighbors avoided the Lees, fearful of bad attention. Others left gifts, notes, or home-cooked meals on their doorstep as small tokens of support. Late one evening, as Mrs. Lee cleared the kitchen table, she found a card slipped through the mail slot. "Thank you for speaking up. My daughter went through something similar. Wish I had fought for her like you're fighting for Emily." The storm of publicity, rumor, and confrontation battered the Lee family, but it also forged a sense of unity and clarity. For every threat An ally appeared. For every hostile rumor, a new truth emerged. Hana refused to retreat, no matter how frightening the attacks became. Emily, exhausted but watching the shifting tides, began to feel something new edging out her fear. A quiet hope that, if enough people insisted on change, her suffering might finally mean something more than pain. The chapter closed on a city divided, a school in turmoil, and a family standing defiantly in the eye of a storm. Undaunted, unwilling to surrender, and more determined than ever to ensure that justice was not just a word, but a promise kept. The truth comes to light. The city awoke to a different tone in the air, a feeling that something elusive, hidden for too long, had finally surfaced. The night before had seen the broadcast of a national news segment, detailing not just the events at Roosevelt High, but the painfully common stories of bullying, cover-ups, and silenced families across suburban America. The Lee family watched from their living room, silent and tense, as their community was swept into the national conversation. The morning brought a tidal wave of messages. Some were angry, a few even threatening, but most were filled with gratitude and relief. Parents, alumni, and even teachers expressing that, for the first time, their pain was seen and validated. Hana woke to hundreds of notifications on the Our Roosevelt Truths account, some from strangers in distant states. She scrolled through stories alike to Emily's. Kids ignored by districts, traumatized by classmates, abandoned by adults, too worried about reputation to act. At school, the mood was palpably different. Students gathered in hushed clusters, their faces set in unfamiliar seriousness. Even those who had dismissed the campaign now wished to distance themselves from the bullies. That morning, the principal's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing a mandatory assembly in the auditorium. The whispered rumors of something big happening had reached a fever pitch. In front of the entire student body and faculty, the superintendent stood beside Principal Thompson, flanked by members of the district board and a representative from the State Department of Education. What followed was a message no one could ignore any longer.
Thank you.
We are aware of recent reports and public stories regarding bullying and administrative response at Roosevelt High. We want our community to know that we are taking these concerns with utmost seriousness. Effective immediately, an independent investigation will be conducted, interviewing students, staff, and families. There will be full transparency, and we promise to report our findings publicly. The words hung in the air, heavy and strangely hopeful. For so long, the system had shielded itself behind closed doors and vague statements. Now, it was forced out into the open. The superintendent continued, "We regret any pain or harm that may have come from a failure to address these concerns quickly and compassionately." As the assembly ended, Principal Thompson's usual composure seemed to falter. She walked off stage, her face ashen. Rumors swirled in the halls. Would she resign? Was she being forced to step aside? Teachers spoke quietly about the coming investigation, some uneasy, others relieved that action was finally on the horizon. The disciplinary process began almost immediately. Over the next days, several students were called into closed-door meetings. Security footage from the gym incident was finally reviewed by outside experts. The main perpetrators, the girls, led by Alexa, each received suspensions. Some faced further consequences, including online behavior monitoring and mandatory counseling for digital cruelty. Their parents, many of whom had denied wrongdoing or blamed immature drama, were formally summoned by the district. Principal Thompson was given a formal reprimand by the school board, pending the outcome of the larger investigation. An interim leader was named, an assistant principal from another district, known for student advocacy. She scheduled open forums where students could voice their experiences, no matter how raw. At the first meeting, a surprising number of students came forward, some in tears, to speak not only about Emily's treatment, but about years of silent suffering and fear of retaliation. The most profound transformation happened quietly. Over time, Emily, though still deeply shaken, began to notice the change around her. Instead of shunning her, classmates offered small gestures, an encouraging note left on her desk, an apology whispered in the hallway. A sketch of hers returned with a new note. "Your art helped me get through last year. Thank you." These moments didn't erase the pain, but they watered the first seeds of trust and connection again. Meanwhile, at home, the Lee family learned to exhale, little by little. After months of holding their breath, watching for every new threat, they were finally witnessing some accountability. Mrs. Lee returned to her bakery with her old vigor. Customers greeted her with, "We're with you," and orders arrived in a steady stream, some including notes of gratitude. Mr. Lee, too, found community among other parents, now emboldened to challenge the school board, determined to ensure real oversight. Hana herself was stunned by the response. She started getting requests to speak, first at the school's student-led assembly, then at a citywide parents' meeting on school safety. "You're brave," someone told her. "But more than that, you're determined." She downplayed her role. "I just couldn't let my sister be erased." Yet as she looked at her thick file of emails and messages, she realized the ripple effect had become a wave. Students from other Seattle schools reached out, asking for advice on how to document abuse or launch their own campaigns for safety. The investigation brought to light not just Emily's suffering, but a cycle of neglect and dismissal spanning years and affecting dozens of other students. The district's final report, released to the public, detailed systematic failings in enforcing anti-bullying policies, chronic underreporting, and a culture of minimizing victims' experiences. Statewide, lawmakers began discussions about tightening oversight, funding mental health staff, and ensuring every school had a student ombudsman tasked only with listening. Despite real progress, there were hard days. Some saw the Lees as troublemakers, blaming them for the school's bad press, while certain teachers felt unfairly scrutinized. But the tide had turned. Alumni wrote op-eds in the local paper, describing similar abuses they'd faced. One board member resigned, citing conscience. The principal, who once urged Hana to keep emotions out of this, issued a public apology. Emily, who had hidden behind silence and a locked bedroom door, agreed to return to her art club. There, she met younger students who quietly thanked her, and for the first time in months, she laughed, a real, unguarded sound that left Mrs. Lee blinking back tears in the car ride home. Change was not instant, and wounds did not vanish. The Lee family still found their courage tested in grocery aisles, at church potlucks, and during the foggy winter mornings. But now, when they gathered at the dinner table, conversation was laced with hope, not dread. Hana, invited to join the district's Student Safety Council, realized she was no longer just Emily's protector. She had become a symbol of courage and relentless advocacy for dozens of families. As winter settled and the city's pace slowed, Roosevelt High stood at the dawn of a new chapter, one marked not only by scars and regret, but also by the hard-won wisdom that truth, dragged into the open, could transform an entire community. For the first time in a long time, Emily, Hana, and their parents dared to imagine a future in which silence was the exception, not the rule. Recovery and new beginnings. The rain that had haunted autumn slowly faded into a winter soft with promise. For the Lee family, life did not suddenly return to normal. Instead, it began to unfurl in small, uncertain steps, each day a little lighter than the last. At first, recovery felt like a word too fragile to trust. Emily still woke from nightmares, her heart pounding, sometimes paralyzed with fear by the memory of jeers, camera flashes, and whispered threats. But the difference was this: someone always knocked gently and waited on the other side of the door. Healing for Emily started quietly. She found it in the rhythmic clatter of the bakery each Sunday morning, where she insisted on helping her mother frost cupcakes and knead dough. Even if her hands shook sometimes, she found it in the paint-splattered pages of her sketchbook, which she opened again one chilly afternoon. Shaky at first, then surer as color returned to her world. Her first drawing, a bird, wings outstretched, was taped above her desk as a talisman. Most of all, she found healing in the presence of her family, who never pushed her to talk, but always listened when she did. Returning to Roosevelt High was an act of courage in itself. The hallways had changed. The silence once used to isolate her became, in some pockets, a gentler quiet, pregnant with possibility. A few classmates, emboldened by the investigation and its aftermath, greeted her in ways that did not demand anything. A nod, a good morning, a quiet compliment about her sketches, taped in the art room window. The bullies avoided her now, not out of fear, Emily thought, but because the spotlight had made their cruelty impossible to hide or defend. Alexa transferred to a different district. Her legacy an uncomfortable cautionary tale. Support, which once felt dangerous to accept, now came in forms Emily could handle. Messages from younger students, a thank you note left in her locker, her art teacher inviting her to co-lead a mural project about resilience. The mural, stretching across a formerly blank hallway, brought together a dozen students who had felt powerless in their own ways. Painting alongside them, Emily listened to fragments of their pain and watched hope emerge, blooming in wide swaths of blue and gold across the wall. Hana, too, was in transition. She struggled to balance college coursework, bakery shifts, and her new role as an advocate, speaking at assemblies and parent meetings. She never tried to sound like an expert, just someone who refused to let her sister's pain be swept away. Her phone never stopped buzzing, but now many messages were requests. An anxious freshman wanted to know if his story would count. A mother asked how to file a complaint properly. A teacher confided her frustration with the system and asked if Hana could connect her with families who wanted to see real change. Some days, Hana felt bone-tired from carrying both her own grief and others, haunted by the stories she couldn't fix. But she also felt herself changing, her voice stronger, her world larger. At the first citywide student advocacy meeting, she looked around at a dozen other teenagers, all with their own reasons for fighting, and felt something like pride. The work was never really done, but it mattered. That was enough for now. Back at home, the Lee family began to knit themselves together in new patterns. Family dinners returned, at first cautious, then growing freer, filled with laughter that sounded more genuine by the week. Mr. Lee started taking Emily along on weekend drives to quiet parks or thrift stores, never mentioning the past unless Emily brought it up. Mrs. Lee found purpose in her own way, leading workshops at the community center about kindness and inclusion. her voice carrying a new authority born from hardship. There were relapses, bad days with sharp triggers, and moments when Emily still questioned her worth, when Hana worried they had risked everything and changed very little. But now, there were lifelines where before there was only isolation. A therapist Emily met once a week who gently helped her name her fears and set healthy boundaries. Friends who invited her out for bubble tea without expecting forced laughter. Slowly, Emily built a life in which the darkness was real, but no longer exclusive. In the broader community, the Lee family's battle had not disappeared from memory. Other families began pushing for more transparency in student mental health resources at Roosevelt and across the district. Led by a loose coalition of parents and students, including Mrs. Lee and Hana, the school board agreed to host monthly forums for sharing feedback and reporting concerns. A subtle but powerful change took root. Students reported incidents more quickly. Teachers sought training on trauma-informed care, and parents started trading information in support networks rather than in whispers behind closed doors. The recovery, then, was not only for the Lee family. The ripple Hana set in motion became a current that pulled others toward a sense of shared responsibility. Students wrote op-eds, an annual art contest and scholarship for resilience through adversity was founded, with Emily hesitant but honored as the first recipient. The mural she helped paint became a gathering place for kids navigating their own silent battles, a testament to scars that could become something beautiful. Eventually, as spring approached and old wounds faded into scars, Emily imagined a future beyond Roosevelt High. She applied to a summer arts program, her portfolio filled with work not just of pain, but of transformation. Hana continued speaking out, determined that every school would one day have its own system for accountability and compassion. Together, they planned a quiet family trip, a weekend at the coast, just the four of them, far from reminders and expectations. On the first warm day of April, the Lees packed sandwiches, locked up the bakery, and drove to the water. On the shore, Emily collected smooth stones and driftwood. Hana waded into the surf, her laughter buoyant and strong. As the sun set behind the dark blue horizon, the Lee family huddled together, wind tangling their hair, a new beginning unfolding in the hush of the tide. Recovery, they learned, was not about forgetting the past. It was about learning, one bold, imperfect step at a time, to trust, to hope, and above all, to live fiercely and gently in the world they had helped change. Aftermath and lessons, the echoes of what happened at Roosevelt High did not fade with the headlines. Even as seasons changed and the initial flurry of media coverage slowed, the Lee family and their community lived with the weight and clarity of what had passed. The ordeal had left scars, but it had also seeded transformation in the school, in the city, and most of all, in the hearts of those who endured and resisted injustice. Emily's life settled into a quieter rhythm, but the experience had marked her indelibly. She felt it every time a stranger's gaze lingered a second too long, and in the flicker of tension that sometimes crossed her parents' faces. Yet, she no longer saw herself simply as a victim or a survivor. The trials she'd faced taught her to recognize her own strength, but also the fragility of those around her, especially the ones whose pain never made the evening news. Her friendship circle was small, but genuine. After school, she would sometimes sit with other students in the art room, talking softly as their pencils scratched against paper. They shared more than just silence. They shared the knowledge that suffering, when faced honestly, could bind people together as tightly as joy. Emily's mural, a riot of colors depicting hands joined in solidarity, had become a landmark at Roosevelt, a living record of both her hurt and her hope. For Hana, life took on new purpose. She resumed her university studies and worked shifts at the bakery. But her mind was never far from advocacy. Invitations to speak at assemblies and community events filled her inbox. At first anxious about being seen as a figurehead, she quickly learned that her real role was not to be a hero, but a connector. At town halls and online forums, she urged others to share their experiences, to lobby for reforms, and, most importantly, to listen to young people whose voices had too often been dismissed. She saw progress, but also pushback. There were families who resented the changes, who believed the bad press had spoiled their neighborhood's reputation. Occasionally, Hana received anonymous messages accusing her of stirring up trouble or making things worse for everyone. But just as often, someone would stop her in the library or at the grocery store and quietly thank her for what she'd done. In the school district, much had changed and much remained the same. The new ombudsman, hired in the wake of the investigation, kept an open door for complaints. Anti-bullying workshops were now led by students as well as counselors. A revised code of conduct included pathways for restorative justice, not just punishment. The ripple effect reached neighboring schools, igniting conversations about inclusion, safety, and transparency. Yet, not every problem vanished. One spring afternoon, Mr. Lee overheard a parent in the bakery grumbling about kids these days and their need for attention. That night, he shared the exchange at dinner.
I knew it.
Emily shrugged,
Look at this.
not wanting to dwell on old
property lines
wounds.
are completely
But
different.
Hana gently challenged the sentiment.
This is
Things
the
won't
connection.
change for good unless we keep insisting they matter. As the academic year drew to a close, Roosevelt High hosted its first annual Voices in the Hall gathering, bringing together students, parents, teachers, and local officials for a night of performances and storytelling. Emily
Boarding pass,
hesitated at
please.
first when asked to read an original poem, memories of humiliation still sharp,
Sir, we need you to
but
step
encouraged by her family and friends. She stepped onto the small auditorium stage. Her voice trembled but grew steady, each word a step away from the shadow of her past. We are more than what they say about us. Her poem was met with a long, hushed silence and then thunderous applause.
He said the man
For the Lee
whispered
family,
something about a pickup
this
later
chapter
tonight.
was not an
And your
ending,
son is
but a
sure it
new
was the
threshold.
lifeguard.
They gathered for weekend meals, sometimes
here,
inviting the
past the old
friends
mill.
and neighbors
You have to
who had
approach
stood
from the
by
north,
them.
otherwise they'll
Mrs.
see
Lee,
you.
her
Be careful.
confidence restored, now volunteered at drop-in centers, baking treats for awareness events, and speaking about kindness as a strength, not a weakness. Mr. Lee joined a citywide parent group advocating for mental health resources and small grants for student-led inclusion projects. Each person found a way to turn pain into purpose. The lessons learned from this ordeal ran deep. For the Lees, and for many beyond their circle, courage has many faces. Sometimes it is loud, marching in protest on the front steps of City Hall. Other times, it is invisible
Here is the data we
perseverance,
discussed.
the
Be
courage to
careful.
open a locked bedroom door, to speak up in a classroom, or to quietly reach out to someone sitting alone. The system is what we demand of it. Bureaucracies resist change, but collective voices, when persistent, force accountability. Institutions, faced with truth in solidarity, can change, however slowly and imperfectly. Listening is the first step to healing. True recovery for victims, families, and communities only begins when those in power listen without judgment, believe the pain, and work for genuine solutions. Family is both anchor and sail. For Hana, Emily, and their parents, love sharpened by hardship held them fast, but also pushed them toward new horizons. Even on the hardest days, they were never truly alone.
Look at this
And
volume
perhaps
spike
most
right
important,
here. It's
wounds
completely
can become
abnormal.
sources of
That's
wisdom
definitely manipulation.
and connection
They tried to hide
after
it in the
years of
rush.
shame and fear. The story of what happened at Roosevelt High was no longer hidden. The Lees had paid a heavy price for their insistence on truth and dignity, but they had also sown the seeds for a better, kinder community. The final days of summer found the Lee family at the water's edge again, feet in the cold surf, the wind carrying the promise of change. Emily quietly traced spirals in the sand with a driftwood stick, while Hana snapped photos for her advocacy blog. They talked about college, about art, about ways to make justice something ordinary,
Hurry up, someone might
not
hear us.
extraordinary.
Look,
As
the
the
drawer.
sun dipped low,
What's inside?
coloring the sky with hopeful streaks, Hana and Emily looked at each other, not with the old fear or grief, but with recognition. Together, they had carried one another through darkness. That bond, forged in fire and lifted by community, was theirs forever. Their story's echoes would continue, a warning, an invitation, and a beacon for every silent voice waiting to be heard. And with each echo, the lessons of their journey would find new life in the hearts and hands of those who dared, at last, to bring truth into the light.